Welcome again to MFT Theory with Brighter Tomorrow's Consulting. This is Chapter 3, Module 4. One thing that might need a little bit of explanation is the course interview and introduction overview for the syllabus was combined in the very first module. Again, it was reviewed in the second module. So this is Chapter 3, Gender, Culture, and Ethnicity Factors in Family Function. This chapter is very sparse in dealing with gender, culture, and ethnicity issues. So in your module, there will be several things, documents uploaded to assist you in your clinical work. One will be the American Multicultural Diversity Competencies that we have for you, as well as a few other documents that you may find helpful that you can resource. So, gender. Definition of?
Gender is a learned set of behaviors that usually in the Western culture correlate with sex.
So, my biological sex means?
Inborn, bodily, genetic, gametal.
My equipment. What was I born with? Vagina, penis, testes, ovaries. What is my biological makeup, my sex? Very frequently in our society, less so now maybe than at previous times, gender and sex are interrelated. They're interchangeable. Not so much now. Your sex can be determined biologically with a blood test. How many what did you get? Did you get XX chromosomes for female? Did you get XY for male? The issue with that comes in with people who are XXY or XYY. People that are androgynous, people who do not meet the actual standard idea of male-female sex. And sex does not have anything to do with sexual orientation. Gender is more of a socio-culturally embedded definition of who do I think that I am? What do I identify as? Am I female? Am I male? Am I androgynous? Do I just don't know? Am I intersexed? What is it that I believe that I am? What is sexual orientation?
The playing out of desire.
Who do I want to be with?
Yes.
Who am I attracted to? Who do I want to have sex with? And going back to the definitions, just for clarity, according to this text, looking at race, because these things are very often not even in the definitions, but they're very often confused. So if we think about an operationalized definition for race, what is race? How is race determined?
It's a very culturally influenced inheritance of behaviors and beliefs.
That's more culture and ethnicity. Race is also biological.
I thought ethnicity was biological.
Race is biological. What DNA did I get? There are only 3 races still, and the terms are very old and by definition may be offensive, but the 3 races that are recognized are Caucasoid, which are white people, European people, Nordic people, Mongoloid, which certainly has an overtone, an offensive overtone when you think about some of the ways that term can be used, but it has to do with the eye shape. Those are Asian people and Native American people and Athabascan, Alaskan Native people. And Negroid, which are people like the African countries, the races in Africa, the peoples in Africa, the Australian Aborigines. It does not, any of those categories do not include Hispanic people or people who are multiracial, biracial, or that don't fit very closely into those categories. But race is still biologically and DNA bound. Ethnicity is which I will search with you and see if the book feels that they can discuss this. The definition for ethnicity in this book are defining characteristics of a social group. It means you share cultural traditions transmitted over generations, reinforced by expectations of any subgroup or family to which the individual or family belongs. Ethnicity has a lot to do with what kind of food you eat and how you celebrate and how you mourn and what's expected of you, how you maintain good standing or poor standing within your family and community. Looking again at the definition of culture. And it is up to us as clinicians to broaden and change these definitions to reflect the society that we live in today. Culture are shared behaviors, meanings, symbols, and values transmitted from one generation to the next. Seems like a very small difference. Basically, they're saying ethnicity is this is the way we act. These are the things that are expected from us. And culture is, this is how we interpret meaning, and this is how we interpret values and beliefs. Not a lot of difference when you're trying to determine these individually.
Do we have time for questions?
Sure.
So in undergrad, I took American Lit, and we did a whole sort of portion of the semester on the slave narrative. And the culminating point was race is behavior. We think that we can look and see it based on color, but you can't. Race is behavior. So the word, I said, okay, well, they say the white race, the black race, whatever race, it's a color thing, and he said that's the problem. We're seeing it, that word is ethnicity. What goes into your genetic cellular makeup that comes out with a level of melatonin or not is your ethnicity. But that was, that wasn't the social science, that was English.
Right.
Is the professor, have I been going the wrong way, or is it used differently in social sciences? Because I really thought ethnicity meant your genetic chemical makeup.
What I've seen is within this framework, what I've seen is race is biogenetic.
And the framework meaning social sciences.
Right.
Okay.
Yes. Okay. So guys, and it's very unfair to Hispanic people or people who do not fit in those particular categories, because then it's like, well, you guys have no category, which, as we know, is not true. There's a tremendous amount of work that's available to be done, research to be done, changes, just like Sue and Peterson came forth with the fourth force for cultural diversity and competency. There is a place for work to be done in this area and to broaden this. In this kind of study, we should not have, even in a marriage and family theory class, we should not have 16 pages devoted to gender, culture, and ethnicity in family functions, because family functions are bound by gender, culture, and ethnicity. So to address that to the best that we can for these purposes, where we'll upload some resources for you, please address this in any kind of discussion posting, and we will move forward. So looking at this, these family interaction processes impact outside social, political, and historical forces. Again, if you're looking at historical forces and political forces, families that have experienced refugee status, that are immigrant families, very clearly feel the differences between race, culture, and ethnicity. Families that are dealing with the first time a child or a family member who is coming out as gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgendered are very much feeling the force of the political and social impact of this within their family functioning. So it says in your book on page 50, Gender, culture, and ethnicity and social class must be considered in a relationship to each other by the therapist. Regardless of whatever approach we use, minority clients sitting before a counselor of a majority population tend to feel a little less comfortable sharing the issues that may be impacted. And compounding that is a therapist who may say, well, we don't want to pay too much attention to race, or everyone's kind of the same. Let's just celebrate our similarities. I think that's great. I think that we should celebrate. I think we should recognize that we're more alike than we're different. However, when you have someone who is vastly different from you, culturally, on any level, any part of the continuum, it is our responsibility as therapists to cross the bridge to where they are. It's our responsibility as therapists to open the conversation and to make them feel comfortable and make them understand that we are there to meet them where they are, where they come in to the session. One thing that it does bring forward on page 50 in terms of gender is the feminist movement, the emergence of men's studies. There's been so much work done around women's study that very little work has been done around men's study, because the supposition has been that counseling was made for, designed by, created for, and structured for men. But the role of men in our society has greatly changed. As our society has changed to more of a gender, sexual equality point, whatever that may mean, or however well that has worked out, the role of men in our families has changed. And to approach a family from a very historical 1950s, 1960s view is not to do good work, not to do good clinical work. So one of the things of self-analysis by family therapists is the thrust toward gender-sensitive family therapy that is trans-theoretical. It crosses any kind of theory, and it's an attempt to overcome sex role, gender role, cultural role, racial or ethnicity role stereotyping. Your clients cannot speak for every transsexual in the world. They cannot speak for every Puerto Rican in the world, for every Honduran in the world, for every family member who has every family who comes to this non-traditional. They can only speak to their own experiences, and that's where we need to meet them. Looking at gender issues, you have to think about that early in life, ages 2, 3, 4, 5, we socialize our children to be the gender stereotype that we want them to be. Little boys don't play with dolls, little girls don't play with guns. Suck it up, stand up and cry. Don't stand up there and cry, be a man. Oh, she's crying. Will somebody give her a hug? We teach our children to be whatever it is that we want them to be. Children are not born with prejudices. Children are taught prejudices, a learned behavior. So if you're looking at attitudes from affiliation, which is cooperative, nurturing, emotionally expressive, and compassionate, that is a behavior that is typically valued by and reinforced for females. Whereas autonomy, power, aggressiveness, competitiveness, rationality is a cultural context that is reinforced for males. The problem is that as we go into the millennial, we have a lot of women who are assertive, self-sufficient, ambitious, rational, competitive, and those women do not always equally fit into the business world or into social classes. Or work here. I think that we have a question.
No, it's
a comment.
They work here.
Yes. And childcare, caregiving, shared responsibilities with housekeeping, with bill paying, with ability to structure our sexual relationships is very much more equal has equaled out across the line.
I do have a question. I'm sorry.
Okay? No, please don't be sorry. Any question is fine.
51 is Levant and Philpott 2002 observed. Do you know these names?
Yes.
The emergence of the new woman. I think the fact that that term even exists is, I don't know. I think it's, why should we have ever had to say the new woman? And how would you then describe the old woman
Well,
without pointing to huge, huge flaws in the way that we've understood everything?
if you don't look at it from a counseling perspective, you look at it from a social constructivist perspective. Women in the 30s and 40s, if you just go back that far, not to mention the pioneer days, but at the 30s and 40s, your life as a female in that time period was as good as your husband made it. If he was faithful, if he was loving, if he was domestically violent, if he was sexually violent, if he was a good provider, poor provider, if you had many children, if you had few children, whatever, your life was what he made it, and that was it, because there were no ways out. Women in the 30s and 40s in this country who found themselves without a husband due to death, abandonment, or anything, because divorce was really not common. I mean, husbands sometimes abandoned their families. They were relegated to just 2 or 3 very small choices. Finding relatives who were willing to take them in, at which point they became housekeeper, maid, babysitter. Trying to find some kind of little job in town as a milliner, selling hats, or working in a general store, or in the local store. Moving forward to the 50s, and not much of that had changed. Divorce was not an option. Self-sufficiency for most women was not an option. Being able to support your children alone was not an option. Women in the 50s who found themselves in that position tried to very quickly recouple with a new husband. 60s came. Many things came about with social change, with the civil rights movement, with the advent of the flower children and the hippies, with the Vietnam War protests, things that had never occurred in this country before. Women began to enter the workforce, because if you look at World War II, or Rosie the Riveter, when they entered the workforce, what happened? Many of them were then displaced. When those returning servicemen came back, women who had held jobs that proved that they could hold jobs and earn a living, not all, but many of them were displaced to make room, because there's only so many jobs. And those jobs had to go to returning veterans who were men who had families to support, which is a presupposition that women did not have families to support. And in the 50s, you didn't have latchkey kids. Latchkey kids, the kids who came home by themselves, and daycare kids, very much a product of the 60s and 70s, even much more. And you're maybe too young to remember this, but the 80s was referred to as the me generation, and that was largely defined by women seeking equality and rights. I'm going to go to work, I'm going to be able to do this. And many women found themselves working 16-hour days. They worked all day long, 8 hours at their shift. They had been up since 5 o'clock that morning, vacuuming, putting things in the crock pot, which is kind of where the advent of the crock pot came, getting their kids ready for school, getting off, coming home, cleaning house, doing homework, bathing kids, and working till midnight so that they could hold a job. Not as much the case for women now, because why? Women in the 60s, 70s, and 80s that did try to work came home to husbands who said, I work all day and I'm not washing dishes. That is not the role of the millennial male. Most of the time in our society now, with most successful marriages, childcare, homekeeping, income producing work jobs are seen to be double income. And most of our families need both parents working in order to survive.
So is this new woman, the new...
Is based on that, not as much for us now.
Because I can imagine the clinical model changed as
Right.
the social model changed.
And that's when Levant and Philpott came out and M.C. Burke is with the new feminist theory. Because at that point, when those things, still looking at page 53, feminist family therapy, when that was coming forward, and those are things like Miller and McGoldrick and Carter, but when that came forward, you had women who were cracking, women whose children were coming home, women who had daycare-raised babies, women whose husbands were having affairs because they were never home, women who were too tired for sex because they were working 16 to 18-hour days, and families began to crack under the stress, and families came into counseling in distress. And the idea of feminist family therapy was there to provide a different view, a social constructivist narrative, postmodern view.
Where before they all had hysteria.
Right. I can't, yeah. And if my husband is abusive to me, physically, sexually, mentally, I can go to bed. I can just be a woman I have female trouble. They didn't say that we had depression or anxiety. It was blamed on our menstrual cycle. And even today, if you look at the advent of Hillary Clinton running for president, regardless of whether someone is pro or con to her bid for the presidency, very much the fact, do we want a female president with a finger on the button to release the bomb, is there. Do we consider women to be cool-headed, rational, thoughtful, intentional, mindful? Or do we, as we consider our men to be, or do we consider women to be hysterical, emotional, impulsive? Pardon? So that is, but that's where this is leading. And some of this, while this may not all be totally relevant to the work we do today, it is relevant to understand the history and traditions, which are what the studies class do. Is to let you know where the MFT work has come from so you can know where we're going. And there is a huge, I would say again, a huge open field for new research and new thoughts about these. Sandra Bim, 1981, which kind of goes back to my previous comments about 1980 was the time. She was an early feminist, and she was interested in androgyny, people having both masculine and feminine traits and characteristics. Bottom of page 53, Sandra Bim. She wanted to challenge previous stereotypic thinking of polar opposites. And she also argued, which we have found to be true, that we socially and culturally embed, ingrain, and reinforce gender schemas. A schema, a map, a gender map into the minds of our children, of our sons and our daughters. And we socialize our children to be what we think they should be. And her theory says that we hamper individual development in either one. It's really terribly unfair for a little girl who loves sports to feel like she cannot be feminine, she cannot be heterosexual, or a little boy who is sensitive, who is interested in child rearing or nursing or helping professions, to feel like that they don't have the option for sexual orientation. That is why it's so important when we're working with this now that we clearly separate gender, biological sex, sexual orientation, culture, race, and ethnicity, and we don't lump them all up into one. That we see the cultural continuum very discreetly across a set of varying diversities. Different isn't bad, it's just different. Everyone does not have to be the same. So the Women's Project in Family Therapy, co-led by Mary Walters, Betty Carter, you will see in Feminist, began in '77 and recently concluded because maybe some of the work had been done. And their whole work was to call attention to constraining experiences of women, to help develop a practical, non-sexist set of therapeutic interventions. In this particular practice, I would ask April, because you work both males and females, do you design your interventions based on gender?
Sometimes it depends on what it is.
Such as?
Well, yeah, I guess I don't.
I don't think you do. That was the point of the question. Would you use Santrate only with females and not with males? Would you use some of the artwork that you do with only females versus males, or only adults versus children? Because within our own intrapsychic selves, we're very much the same, gender notwithstanding, sexual orientation notwithstanding. So, looking at gender from a feminist perspective, again you see McGoldrick's and Anderson and Walsh. Frommer Walsh is the author of the Family Systems text that we offer in this same class. And so they endorse the notion that male bias is taught, it is learned, it is built into family concepts that take heterosexual patriarchal families as the norm. And they argue that terms like over-involved mothers in meshed families are sexist and tend to blame the mother for the family problems. If I'm a mother and my child is having problems, it must be my fault. The mother guilt is embedded. Sir? The schizophrenic mother, absolutely. And they look at cybernetic concepts, which if you think back to cybernetics as kind of the family as a machine, which didn't work totally well, as circular causality to design a repetitive pattern of mutually reinforcing behavior in male-female relationships as repugnant. They said that this systems-based concept implies that each partner has equal power and control in transactions, which is disputed. And if you look at families, problematic families, families that come in with rape, families that come in with incest, molestation, families that come in with domestic violence, not to say that you couldn't have a domestically violent family where the woman is the batterer, because that does occur. But what is the norm? What is the likelihood? What is the probability is that it's male-female. If you look at families with economic power or lack thereof, quite frequently the male is the one with the economic power. So their argument is that it is not an equal transaction, and it cannot be an equal transaction. And trying to emphasize equality across family relationships, but understanding that there is a superior physical strength in men. There is a greater masculine power in some human relationships. There is a corresponding vulnerability, physical vulnerability, sometimes economic vulnerability for women and for children. And family therapy has historically, I would not say now, but historically, largely ignored gender issues and conceptualized in family life. They've largely ignored same-sex families. They've largely ignored families that do not fit a mother, father, 2.5 children, picket fence, dog, and a cat model.
Has it been out of intentionally you trying to maintain a definition of what it is by ignoring, saying this isn't, or is it just they didn't know any better?
I think it's a combination of the two. I think one thing is that if you just take the issue of gays and the very term, whether you find it offensive or inoffensive, but the very term coming out of the closet, by definition, anything in the closet, sexual molestation, rape and incest, marital rape, domestic violence, those issues are very much in the closet. What's in the house stays in the house, right? Transgender, those things have not been even open for discussion socially, politically, spiritually. They've not come open. And again, I'm not necessarily saying that I heartily endorse this, but I have seen this phenomenon. Where have we socialized our society to accept sexual diversity, interracial marriages.
Where?
Where?
Urban.
But where has it become, when does it come in our living room and we understand that it exists? On TV, with commercials. If you look at the commercial with the interracial couple, I think it was a very large African-American man with a very Caucasian wife, a little biracial daughter with Cheerios. There was such an outcry about that little commercial for no reason other than it openly showed. That has been, what, 2 years ago? Look at the commercials that show interracial families now, interracial couples. Look at reality TV shows, I Am Kate. That is how, as a society, right or wrong, whether that makes us informed, whether that makes us educated, that is where we understand that there are diversities and differences within our daily lives. Then it filters into the schools and the training programs, or it comes out into session. We cannot stand by and ask our clients to bring forth the very issue that they're seeking help with. We have to be able to ask sensitive, hesitant, tentative questions, but exploratory, investigatory questions, and find out what our clients then want to say. If we can open the door to the conversation, they can enter the conversation. But it's very unfair to them to ask them to begin the conversation. They began it by asking for an appointment. So if you're looking at Rachel Hare Mooston, 1987, she says that gender is the basic category around which the world is organized, that that's the first place. And I will agree that of all the areas that we diverge culturally, that gender is the very first cutting edge. How we identify, who do we think we are. And she was a powerful advocate for rules and rationality. And she gives an example on caring. We still accept the fact that our males cannot speak to us, that they can't express their feelings, that they're not able to talk about things, that they're really socialized to kind of the football mentality of suck it up and to talk about it. Changing in education, work, and family roles, one thing that has changed and has caused change is the almighty dollar. If women are educated and women have jobs and are bringing in significant amounts of income into the family, their power differential begins to decrease. And it decreases between male-female or between partners. And their ability to make, their decision-making ability increases, which is what this with Goldenberg and Goldenberg on 56 discusses. Ann Weiss in 1985 surveyed the traditional family organization persisted even when the woman works. Goes back to when I was talking earlier about women who had an 18-hour workday, came home with domestic chores, family responsibilities, child care without their husbands helping them. Much of that has changed over the last 30 to 40 years. And women still are more likely apt to outlive men, find themselves alone, and possibly financially impoverished unless they've been able to make their own income. One thing that has changed with women in the workplace, women have found greater instances of women drinking more heart attacks from stress between the two. So in every continuum, there's a positive and a negative. Things to look at. Men's studies, gender role awareness. One of the works with men's study has been to talking about role restrictions. Once the conversation has been open for males, many men have said, I wanted more involvement with my children. I didn't think that's what I was supposed to do. I thought I was supposed to go to work. I try to help her around the house. She doesn't like what I do. The way I do it is not right. Sometimes when you need help, you just take help where you can get it. Many men have said, I've lived my whole life. I had a heart attack at 60 because I wasn't able to open up. I felt like if I opened up and expressed my emotions and beliefs and concerns, that I would be considered to be weak, that I would lose my standing as the head of the household.
That says a lot about the power of being perceived to be concretely identified with a certain gender has over people. Because if there weren't that paranoia, that absolute fear of I might be interpreted differently, you know, homeboy could live longer. He may not have had a heart attack. Wow.
And there used to be this thing, and it's not nearly as common now, but it used to be a lot of female executives' desk, particularly in the 80s. The differences between men and women is he's decisive, and I'm inflexible. He's powerful, I'm a bitch. And it had several different, do you remember this? I don't remember, but it had several different choices. And it had to do with how males and females are interpreted with exactly the same behaviors in the workforce. And one thing that you may see, I don't think it doesn't exist. I think it is much more amorphous now than it used to be. But there definitely was a reality for equal pay for equal work. There definitely wasn't a glass ceiling that female executives ran into. And it was very commonly expressed, we're not going to pay you this amount of money to do the same work that your male counterpart does because he has a family to support. And you're just kind of out here doing it because you're bored. And many companies were sued for that. And if it still occurs, and probably to some degree it probably still does, it is much more cloaked. It's not as openly expressed, for sure. One interpersonal area where gender asymmetrical power and control intersect always is in family violence and sexual abuse. And that has to be assessed in any kind of family treatment early. So, Lewis contends that the family as a whole is stronger, healthier. Think about what kind of control would be required to be able to perpetrate domestic and family violence on a female and her children, and sexual abuse on her children, and understand that the rules of the family for silence are not going to be broken, and what it would take in therapy, and how you would do that and still provide safety for the people who are there.
It's terrorism.
It is terrorism. Page 59, non-sexist counseling versus empowerment gender. Non-sexist counseling does not reinforce stereotype gender roles. It encourages clients, particularly if you're looking at career, to look at a wide range of choices, avoids gender stereotypes with diagnostic interpretation, avoids sexist assessments, treats male and female clients equally, avoids misuse of power. A lot of this has to do with who we're going to triangulate with and who we're going to ally with. When you're doing couples and family counseling, the family's the client, the couple's the client, and that has to be clear early on. If you have a partner, male or female, who does not feel heard, validated, supported in the counseling session, and the other partner feels that the counselor is bound to them and sees their side, you're not doing family and couples counseling. You're doing individual counseling with an audience. Yes, sir. Did you have a question?
No.
Comment?
Yes, I'm thinking
Criticism?
I'm going to put full of those. I'm thinking I'm going to incorporate. I've been making notes about what I could put into the training for March and or later wise, and I think this is a huge deal. This table 3.1 on 59. You've been describing this awful situation where we go from shaman to a breakthrough at Freud, to the yellow wallpaper, hysteria, to what looks here was going to be a big step, non-sexist counseling, but look at the huge step between these both positives, the empowerment, feminist, and gender-aware counseling. They're both positive steps from what I would call the dark ages, but this one seems to be Are they advocating one over the other in this chart?
They're just saying these are characteristics of. Empowerment, feminist, gender aware, is saying social, cultural, and political factors come into this room. We don't do just marriage and family therapy, we
While
do
on the left.
systemic.
We have do not reinforce stereotype gender roles.
Okay.
That's kind of like a
Micro.
basic.
Micro,
Yeah.
macro.
Okay. Is that the difference?
That's the difference. Okay? Help them transcend limitations from gender stereotyping, recognizing the degree which their behaviors have, because they're internalized. Nobody sits down quite clearly and says, these are the rules for you as a little boy, and these are the rules for you as a husband, and as a wife, and as a little girl. Those comments may be made, but the way they're embedded is typically nonverbal, and it's a constant barrage. Gender role analysis, helping them to integrate culturally defined masculine and feminine. Why are so many things in our society divided as being masculine or feminine? Sports, power, income, childcare, homekeeping. Why has it been necessary for those things to go specifically to masculine or feminine camps versus adult camps with caregivers, or child camps, because this is the way I'm growing up, and develop collaborative counselor-client relationships. The only thing I will say is that when our field began with predominantly, almost exclusively older male, Caucasian medical professionals, it was a beginning field, it was a growing field, it is a field that has evolved and changed as our political and social climate has changed. Doesn't mean that everything was right, a lot of it was wrong, but it is a field that is open to change. It is a field that is open to research, it's a field that's open to expansion. And so the work that needs to be done is there for anyone who wants to pick it up. Culture sensitive therapy is important. Again, my focus is always across the cultural continuum. Age, sex, gender, race, culture, ethnicity, sexual orientation, disability versus ability, faith system versus whatever else. Anything that creates chasms and differences between us, we need to be able to bridge those things, to talk about those things, to acknowledge those things, to understand those things. And it talks about on page 60, the evolving view of cultural diversity recognizes that members of various racial and ethnic groups retain cultural identity while they still share common elements with dominant American culture. If you're looking at a test question, that question is going to be acculturation.
And there are how many stages to that? There's conflict, crisis, contact, conflict, and crisis, right?
We can upload the cultural, racial, and I think it's sexual identity model to the drive. Aponte 2000, Harriet Aponte has done much work with cultural diversity, being Puerto Rican and not finding himself very clearly in any of the racial categories that we currently espouse.
This reminds me of what we talked about in play therapy, using the sand tray figurines. There's a private, what is it? It's
Personal.
Yes, the personal.
Personal unconscious, collective unconscious.
Yes. Is that the same thing? Are they saying
It's
it
similar.
differently?
They're saying it differently, but it's similar.
So it's not just age-based and identity,
No.
like individual-based, but it can be collective as in ethnicity-based.
Yes, well, it should be. We should take what we learn in one place and be able to generalize it to another thing. If you're looking at developing a multicultural framework with Prochaska is the theorist who worked with De Clementi with the stages of change. And he said there's no single theory of personality applicable to a family. Families must have a pluralistic outlook. You can't have a singular view of a family because there's not one single member. There's each member of the family each subsystem of the family, the parent, the spouse subsystem, the spousal subsystem, the sibling subsystem, the parent-child subsystems, each person, and then the collective family as a whole. It must be looked at from a pluralistic view. And culture, race, ethnicity has to go in there. So more than just trying to learn about Argentinian or Honduran or Nicaraguan or Swahili cultures, we have to be advocates of multiculturalism from Peterson, 2000, one of the founding fathers of the fourth force of multicultural competency, to adopt an open, flexible attitude about diverse cultures and cultural influences without being tied to specific cultural groups. Knowledge, awareness, and skills. Knowledge of our own culture. Knowledge of others' cultures. Awareness of our own identity model. Awareness of where other people may be. Awareness of our own prejudices, biases, discriminatory thoughts and behaviors. Awareness of others. And skills, being able to then work skillfully within those groups and having an embedded sense of sensitivity and respect.
Question.
Yes?
Since I'm new to the clinical realm, what is the difference between being made aware through education and training that other cultures exist, that your perspective is exactly your perspective, and that can be fallible and you will meet challenges? What is the difference between that being sufficient and having all these sort of sensitivity trainings? What is the difference?
It's to raise the awareness. You gain knowledge. Awareness is raised, right?
Yes.
Skills are developed. But the hope is that within all of those things can still be external out here. You can teach it to me. I can become aware of it. I can learn these skills. But what's internalized is sensitivity and respect.
Is it because that doesn't come without learning that there are others and then learning about the others?
No, I think the sensitivity and respect can be there originally. And then you gain knowledge, awareness, and skills. But if you have someone who does not have sensitivity and respect to begin with, hopefully the process of knowledge, awareness, and skills will help that develop, but you have to maintain the responsibility to know that it also may not. That's why there's the whole controversy about Christian counselors, and I will openly state for anyone who wishes to hear, I am a Christian, not necessarily a Christian counselor, because I don't quite understand what that term means. My faith system is Christian, but when you use Christianity to say, I'm not going to counsel you because I don't like the way your skin looks, I don't like the shape of your facial features, I don't like the texture of your hair, I don't like who you might choose to sleep with, I don't like which God you choose to serve, or that you choose to serve none. And you hide behind and use Christianity as a model to leave people out. In my view of Christianity, tells me that the Bible says, whosoever will. The Bible, and I know that there are many scriptures that many people use to exclude. But in my world, in Christianity, it's inclusive. There is no place for excluding. And so if you hide behind Christianity to say that before me are hurting people, and they might as well walk out of my door and continue to hurt because my faith system tells me that I am righteous in closing the door to them. That is not what Christianity says to me.
You don't make a lot of money either.
No, you do if you have several subsets of populations that you can't see. Yeah, you need. And so the ACA Code of Ethics revised some years ago to say that you cannot go through a counselor training program and say, I will not see same-sex couples, I will not see homosexuals, I will not see Muslims, I will not see whoever. Okay? Because I'm going to be a Christian counselor and I'm going to work in a church. That is not what your license says. You do not get a license from the state that says you can be a counselor and you can work with these populations and you can go work in a church. And that has been very clearly defined. You are given a license to be a counselor to see clients. Now, if I had a client who came to me who was clearly out of my realm, and I feel this way the same thing if I saw a 15-year-old girl who had eating disorders and I knew that there was a counselor over here that their specialty was eating disorders, and I knew that that's not what I knew a lot about, I would refer them for the good of the client, not for the good of me. But if I have a child who has had eating disorders and there is nobody close by, what I need to do is I need to take them, associate a psychiatrist and a medical doctor. I need to raise my awareness and skills level. I need to do everything I can while I'm still actively searching for someone who is more skilled than I am. But you do not turn them away and say, I cannot help you. Same issues for me if I have, and I've said this before, but if you're looking at depression and anxiety and partner violence and work-related stress and some of the things that people come in to see us for, there's not gay anxiety, there's not Muslim depression. Clients are people and they experience clinical issues that are common to all people. With the cultural overlays that would attend a client who's culturally diverse to me, those things are there anyway with every client that comes to the door. That responsibility is on me.
So to a clinician who may not outright say it, but refuses to see transsexual, transgender, same-sex or same-sex oriented clients, they're doing wrong by the ACA Code of Ethics, but they're doing a service to the client by not taking them in when it wouldn't be a good relationship. Have they overall done right or wrong?
It depends.
It always does.
It always does, because there's no right or wrong answer. What counselors typically say is, I'm out of my competency, and the ACA Code of Ethics says don't get outside of my competency. Okay, if you cannot, according to common factors, see a client with unconditional positive regard, then you should not see that client. That is absolutely the case. We do not see sex offenders here because, one, we are not capable of offering them unconditional positive regard because we see too many of their victims, because it's not a safe environment to mix those two populations. Okay? That's not clinically sound. So the same argument that I'm proposing could be turned back against me because we don't see sex offenders. I get it, I accept it, I own it, I know it, that's how it is. If you can't see a client and you refer them, probably you're doing the right thing. But understand that there is a place to broaden yourself clinically. And sex offenders do not fit clearly on the cultural continuum. Where they fit is in offending, but in offending behaviors. I have a responsibility to provide safety for the clients who walk through my door. I have a responsibility to train the counselors who work for me to be culturally competent and sensitive, and to identify if they are not, as we did have a situation, and that counselor no longer be here.
I guess what it is that you don't want to see a client for 6 months and then find out that that they're gay and say, oh, I can't see you anymore. Sorry. Kind of thing.
I mean, I think that would be criminal.
That would be abandonment.
Right, and it goes the other way. You have clients who walk through the door, and in this particular practice, which does not mean that we're a model for every practice across, for the students that we're teaching or anywhere else, but in this practice, we do not match African American counselors with African American clients. We do not match same-sex counselors with same-sex clients. We match clients based on, one, counselor skill and competency and availability. And if we have clients who choose to go elsewhere because the cultural composition or makeup of the counselor they received is not who they wish to see, then they go elsewhere.
That's very fair. It's like roulette, a positive roulette.
But I mean, that is the model. The counselors that work here are expected to be the cream of the crop, at the very top. Skilled, competent, trained, sensitive, ready to go to do the best work that they know how to do. That's who we offer clients. And when we've done that, we've done all we can do. So let's finish this up. Again, you see McGoldrick, Giordano, those are names that you're going to see with cultural diversity, with feminist therapy. Goldenberg, looking at culturally specific families, common to a group, African American families, Cuban families, lesbian families, or idiosyncratic families that may be unique. So culturally specific is more of a group, idiosyncratic is more individual families. Looking at values, looking at ethnic minority families, looking at dominant cultural norms, what the collective identity is, what the stress may be on family connectedness. If you have immigrant families who are born in another country, like Koreans, they come in, they bring their children who also were born in Korea. They have grandchildren who are first-generation Americans who've gone to school. Quite frequently, those things have changed, and the family sense of unity, collective identity, connectedness begins to suffer, and they find stress with those things. Do you keep your children, do you allow them to acculturate? Do you allow them to assimilate? Do you require that they stay connected? If you're looking at what it means for white therapists to insist that they're colorblind, I don't say color, I don't say race, I just say clients. It's a disservice, and it's remarkably unfair, because it says to your client, I can't see you. It's a denial of their uniqueness, their experiences, their history, their social existence. Ethnicity refers, and they give you the same definition on the bottom of page 62, the unique characteristics of a social group sharing national origin. Ethnicity is what country did you come from? And if you look at a country like China,
That's nationality.
but it still is related.
Part of it. Okay.
Yes, it's part of it. Common ancestry, country of origin, common group history. But if you look at China and you look at a very large country like China that has very different demographic areas, is when you start to see different cultures, even in the same country, even within the same ethnicity. The definition of family differs in different ethnic groups. Nuclear family typically is Anglo-Saxon, Caucasian, African American, Latino families, Hispanic families, Native American families. Asian families tend to see collective, extended families. Native American families go a step further from the collectivist to the tribalist view. The family life cycle is influenced by